Now we start the first session of this afternoon. The first speaker is Shimon, and his title is David and I read through Aurobindo to find some light in our differing days. So please.
Okay, so first, obviously I'm in a big problem because I'm not going to speak about sex and not even on art. So it's a bit, I don't want to discourage it. I will start with a quote. Thank you very much for this very interesting content, which I think combines a lot of angles which I was not aware of. But I start from a quote from Bergman's letter to ANDTHE. We'll talk about him later, one of the devotees in Pondicherry Ashram. There are so many ways of spiritual development offered to men today. There is Rudolf Steiner, to whom I am very much indebted. There is Uspansky, whom I do not know. There is Guno, whom I have studied this autumn. There is Shivananda, there is Krishnamurti, and there is Pondicherry. How can a man who has no personal experience and who seeks his way decide for himself which way is the right way? My paper should be defined as a working paper, and it's as it part of my broader research titled The Cultural and Political Encounter Between Indians and Jews in the context of their growth of their respective national movements. I mean, it's important to me to emphasize me because I'm writing about Max Theon, but for me he's just one of a series of other what could be described as a Jewish Orientalist who has some eclectic knowledge. This is how I approach him, but there is another connection for Aurobindo, and this actually the whole idea of the research was to map the discourse from the Jewish world to India, and what was the reason for that, and in which role it's played in Zionist and Asian and things like that. So it's under the umbrella of the two national movements. So this is how actually I got to this subject. So I'm very pleased for the opportunity to work on this subject, as it's going to be published hopefully this year as a book. But I defined this as a working paper since I realized that there is much more issues and research still to be done than I thought in the beginning. And this, Peter, maybe you will be able to help me to locate other papers that I think there are in Aurobindo Ashram. Bergman encounter with India and Aurobindo, and later the mother, is interesting since it combines two aspects. The political, Bergman is a public Zionist activist, and the second, cultural and philosophical, and even Bergman is a seeker, or maybe, to be more precise, almost a seeker. Bergman correspondence with Aurobindo Ashram also revealed the problematic aspects, which I think we can be all of aware of here, of an attempt of a dialogue between a devotee, Dr. Indra Sen, and a scholar, like Bergman with his hesitation, doubts, but also his desire to get closer or even maybe to cross the line. I think that many of us are familiar with this challenge, since we have to face this challenge when we deal with esoteric and occult group, but also with yoga students and some Kabbalah, people who practice Kabbalah, for example. And sometimes it comes to a dead end, as we will see later. Bergman's interest in Aurobindo philosophy and the mother reveals a whole connection of people like Pascal Teman-Lis, Yehuda Hanegbi, David Ben-Gurion, but also was part of it, Immanuel Oswanger, who translated many lines of Savitri to Hebrew, and was the first one to make a translation of the Bhagavad Gita to Hebrew. Martin Buber, which has a lot of, was looking on Gandhi, and many other, and some others. You can say that they were part of kind of intellectual circle in Jerusalem who developed some kind of interest in the Eastern wisdom, and part of it as in India. Not surprisingly, they were also what can be defined as being on the left side of the political Zionist spectrum. So in one hand, they were respected as scholars and intellectuals, but politically they were on the margin, not Ben-Gurion, of course, but Martin Buber and Hugo Bergman. They were margin of the Zionist political spectrum. The reason for that is that it was a general positive view towards the Arabs and as part of it also to Asia. Not all of them can be defined as pan-Asiatic, like meaning that the Jews should give up Europe and be part of Asia, but surely they had a more positive view towards the Arab and to Asia wisdom, each one from his own reason. I'm not going into this subject, it's a whole subject by itself. A closer look into Bergman files, which are located in the Israeli National Library, revealed that he kept numerous newspaper cuts, papers, letters, reports, notebooks, fully unreadable. I mean, it's possible to read his remarks on Aurobindo books. It's something that I don't know who can do it. Unreadable comments, printed articles by him and others on Aurobindo, draft for articles, and maybe what is, I think, I'm quite sure that because there are about 40, 50 pages, is a draft for a book about Aurobindo or a chapter in a book. The content of his India-related papers deal with two aspects. One, it's his political activity as the head of the Jewish delegation to the Inter-Asian Conference in 1947. I will come to it very soon. And the other is result from this visit on Aurobindo and later the mother. Before I continue, I want to thank Dr. Enrico Lupa, who is not here, who is working on a much-awaited biography on Bergman. Surprisingly, there is no such a biography written till now. I think we discussed it a bit with Jonathan. I don't know. It's interesting issue why or how Bergman was appreciated in the intellectual and prominent scholar circle in Israel. Was he a philosopher or just someone who wrote about other philosophers? Anyway, Dr. Enrico Lupa exposed and gave me many valuable documents. He is really now an expert about Bergman. And since then, we have quite a fruitful encounter because I gave him some documents about India and so on. I want to add just also a small personal note. We know, I think, from your article, Boaz, that some evidence of people visiting Max Theon and Mary Ware about her supernatural powers, right? I think in one of them describing how when she wanted to sit on an armchair, the armchair was reaching her. So I do not claim to have these supernatural powers, but I had the privilege of sitting many times on Hugo Bergman armchair, which by coincidence found a class place in the small apartment of my ex-wife's sister. Being obviously now, because of the kids, in much worse shape since the days Bergman was reading passionately Aurobindo's book on it, perhaps together with David Ben-Gurion. Also, my ex-wife was in, and this Peter, he knows her. Hadar was probably the first Israeli devotee of the mother in the early 70s. This actually led us, when we have 3 babies, to live 3 months in Aurobindo. And this, in Hanukkah, suddenly somebody came in. I don't want to speak about the divine light, but we were lighting Hanukkah candle, and then this was Yehuda Hanegbi. I'm not an expert about Aurobindo philosophy, nor about Bergman's career and his numerous writing. But through my research about the encounter between the Jewish world and the Indian cultural and political world, I have realized that it's very important to emphasize that some of the key intellectuals on both sides shared a keen and maybe even intensive interest. From the Indian side, the 3 main notable culture agents, as we say, of India to the world, and part of it to the Jewish and Zionist world, in Europe and in Palestine, were Rabindranath Tagore, of course, Mahatma Gandhi, and I think we can all agree that the third important one was Sri Aurobindo. He was the third most important saint or guru of his time. So in this chain, Rabindranath Tagore, the early one, Gandhi and Aurobindo, and this is very interesting to see that 3 of them, there was Tagore was very important in the Jewish literature, Gandhi in the Jews in South Africa, published a book about it, it's a very important subject, and Bergman was the one who was looking on Tagore. So you can say that the 3 main people were, there was a lot of interest in them. So it was Bergman who lectured and published articles in Hebrew about Aurobindo and was the one to have a direct contact with the ashram in Pondicherry. This led him to be introduced by his letters to Aurobindo and later to the mother. I do not have to give biographical information about Aurobindo, we heard about it, and the mother, but few biographical notes about Bergman might be needed. But I think that The most important, as I see it, biographical aspect about Aurobindo that Bergman emphasized was the transformation from a freedom fighter to a sage or a guru after he heard clearly God's word when he was in jail. I assume that this aspect was one of the main reasons why Bergman, as being both an activist and a scholar, so this was has kind of close, because he found himself in the same place in a way, being activist but actually attracted to this kind of things. This is why he was attracted to Aurobindo. Bergman was born in Prague in 1883, where he studied philosophy. His friendship with Kafka and Rudolf Steiner and others are well known. He was influenced, as he said, by Steiner, and he published articles and introduction to Steiner books in Hebrew, and some articles about him. He was part of the important Bar Kochva organization in Prague. He immigrated to Palestine in 1920 and was appointed the director of the National Library, expanding its book collection dramatically. He became professor of philosophy in 1928 and the dean of the Hebrew University in 1935. He won twice the Israeli prize. Together with Buber and other prominent intellectuals, he was a key person in a small but important Brit Shalom organization which advocated the dual Arabic Jewish state as a solution to the developing violent conflict in Palestine. Bergman was sent to India as the head of the Yishuv delegate to the Inter-Asian Nation Conference in March 1947. This took place in New Delhi. The conference was organized by Nehru. Nehru was the key factor in India's long rejection to Zionism and later to the state of Israel. This made a political encounter. And it was part of Nehru's effort to make India a regional power and I think also himself as a regional leader. Due to his opposition to a Jewish state in Palestine, he did not want to invite a delegation from the Jewish population, but it was his sister, Lakshmi Nadas, who pressed him to invite. It was actually by Emanuel Seller, who was an American parliament member who was very much appreciated in India because he was supporting for the Indian national freedom, and he pressed the sister of Nehru and she pressed him. The solution that was found was the Jewish delegation was officially called the delegation of the Hebrew University, but the delegation called itself the Jewish Eretz Israel Missionary. This was in fact the last political effort of the Zionist movement trying to change the Indian National Congress' long and stubborn rejection to Zionism. This is by itself, it's an interesting chapter, but as I said, it belonged to the political encounter, which it's not the topic here. For me, one of the interesting points is that it's clear that we can term it as the Oriental paradigm, meaning that to India, one has to send an intellectual or philosopher like Bergman and later Oswager and so on. You don't send to India an experienced statesman. You send an intellectual philosopher who has some interest, or he was or like Kaneba, or he had some friendly connection to Gandhi. Bergman was the most senior cultural Jewish spokesman in the mission. In his archive, he kept, as I said, numerous documents. But during the conference, he was also appointed the special correspondent of Haaretz newspaper. That obviously resulted, and Macha Chabas, another woman, was the special correspondent for Davar. That obviously resulted that the special correspondent was reporting on his own activities. The conference got a huge coverage in the Jewish press, and this is not surprising since it was taking place in the eve of both countries reaching their independence. In one of his first publications in Haaretz, he reported that he gave a lecture on Judaism before the conference in the 5th World Religion Federation, which was taking place in Delhi. The Religion Federation was attended by Christian, Muslim, Chinese, Baha'i, and Buddhist. Somehow he doesn't mention Hindu, surprisingly. Apparently, it was in this conference that Bergman met the scholar and the psychologist, Dr. Indra Sen, who at that time was already devoted. This is what I assume. I'm not sure, but this, I think I can figure it up. Maybe if you can find another, because it's important, because Indra Sen, through all his correspondence, referred to this meeting as some kind of, special, divine, spiritual meeting. And Bergman doesn't answer for this part. Ingo Sen was born was a Bengali who was born in Punjab. He completed his master's degree in both philosophy and psychology from the University of Delhi. He got his doctorate from the University of Freiburg. This is also a connection because he knew German. And he taught psychology and philosophy at the Hindu College in Delhi. In 1939, he first traveled to Pondicherry with a friend and returned again with his wife. The visits became frequent, and after a number of visits, his wife became a devotee of the mother. In 1945, Dr. Sen resigned from the university and moved to the Sri Aurobindo ashram, where his family has already been staying for 2 years. After the Asian Nation Conference, Bergman went back to Palestine and gave lecture in the Hebrew University about his experiences in India and the conference. We don't know what was in this lecture. In 1947, he was sent as a cultural delegate of the Hebrew University to Stockholm, to Sweden, where he gave a serial of lectures of great Jewish thinkers. But as a result from his visit to India, he gave also 2 lectures, one about Mahatma Gandhi and one about Sri Aurobindo. This was actually his first lecture about Aurobindo. Bergman wrote to Sen, "My lecture on Sri Aurobindo has a very good reception by a large audience. The previous lecture was devoted to Gandhi. This was 3 days before his death, before Gandhi's death. In the following lecture, I could not pass over Gandhi's death, so the lecture was announced Mahatma Gandhi and Sri Aurobindo. And the unfortunate actually drew many attendants to my lecture who had never heard the name of Sri Aurobindo." And it's really important because Bergman was the one who actually introduced Aurobindo in Sweden. He arranged that his book will be sent to the libraries in Sweden. Bergman sent his first letter to Sen and enclosed an article titled Physicalism, which he hoped to publish in Indian Philosophical Journal, which apparently happened with the help of Sen. Since then, the two started to correspond for more than 10 years, till 1958, maybe later, but I don't know. It was Ingo Sen who was responsible for the information, knowledge, and especially Aurobindo's book, which were sent regularly since then with the approval of Aurobindo and the mother to Bergman. Bergman wrote to Sen reporting was his advance in studying Aurobindo philosophy, but also about his difficulties. I quote, "I have just read Sri Aurobindo, the yoga and its object. And then he said, take without pride what help you can form the living guides who already trod the paths. These words gave me the courage to write you again. You have kindly suggested that I write directly to Sri Aurobindo, but I think the time has not come as long as I have not studied enough his own writing, and I may find an answer to my question when I continue to read his book. I'm reading several of his books at the same time. I have started Life Divine, and I have read the 11 chapters so far. The reading is rather difficult. In Sciences of the Yoga, I have read about a half. It becomes difficult for me when it starts speaking about Purusha Parikti, it's Indian terms. I'm so ignorant about Indian thought and literature. And then I'm entirely lost. And then he suggested that they would put some translation for the Sanskrit concept. And then Bergman was describing his difficulties. And this is a post-war, and in Stockholm there are many German Jewish refugees, like after the Holocaust. Allow me now, dear Dr. Sen, a few words about my own difficulties. As I see them at present, they are not of a theoretical character. As far as I see now, I have no theoretical objection. The only concept which is very difficult for me is lila. I cannot grasp, all the tear shades in this world of God play. Lila is kind of Sanskrit terms. It's like God play and with joyful aspect in it. This seems to me a very cruel expression. Maybe I do not understand the association connected to the word in Sanskrit. When I read the other way that Gandhi demanded a vow of fearlessness as a condition for his ashram, I thought that I would not live up to the condition like that. It is not a cowardice, but misgiving and pessimism. Perhaps conscious of the Jewish situation today as in time past. I know theoretically that if we trust God, we need not fear anything, but I cannot realize it in a life, especially now, when I'm away from my country and think there are total. Bergman was stuck in Sweden because of the independence war in Israel. He could not go back. Bergman's difficulties were on a practical character. How to find a technique or a method to overcome pessimism and fear. The letter impressed Sen, so it was read again to Aurobindo. Sen wrote, "Your letter had much interested our seekers. it had also been read out to Sri Aurobindo. I was very happy that your letter had a complete presentation to the master. In another letter, Bergman related to the problem of meditation and again the lack of method, what he considered lack of method in Aurobindo philosophy. My chief personal difficulty is that I do not know if I'm going the right way at all. I have nobody to ask except you. I'm not impatient and I do not expect any tangible for me fruits in the next future. What I should like to know is only this: if I'm not wasting my time and if every day is used by me for the one purpose it should be used for. I have not found any method. I do my duty for the sake of the divine. I made it my duty to remember this, say, 5 or 8 times a day. I have noticed the mantra on page 312 in the letters of Sri Aurobindo. As for concentration or meditation exercise, this is probably the weakest point. Outer conditions are not very favorable. I found it the best way to pray about 3 times a day my usual Hebrew prayers, especially the Psalms, and to use them as a ladder, a means to inner collectedness. I'm very uncertain if this is enough and if I could do more, and what. And then we go on. I do not want to lure myself, but I should try to follow your advice. If you can give me any other console, or if you can bring my case before Aurobindo, I will be very grateful. I repeat, it is not matter of impatience. Sri Aurobindo passed away in 1951. Bergman sent a special note to India and Israel. This was a publication for 5 years in Bombay, which was hoping to establish some kind of contact between, because India didn't recognize Israel, so this was kind of the attempt. And he also sent it to the ashram alongside with Osvager translation of Savitri. You have it here. You can see this is a Savitri translation of by Osvager. Bergman and Osvager also organized a joint commemorative meeting under the Israeli Oriental and the Philosophical Society in the Hebrew University, and Bergman wrote about it. This is for you, Boaz. The loss to the world caused by the demise of Sri Aurobindo was deeply mourned in Israel, where his personality and his teaching have greatly influenced the outlook of a wide intellectual circle. Maybe you can write it in the introduction to the book about the cosmic. In his Word of Gratitude, published in India as well, Israel, he chose to speak few words as a Jew. And this is very interesting. I mentioned it yesterday. Bergman drew a parallel between, and I quote, Aurobindo message about the arising of new humanity, which touches the heart of Jewry, brought up in atmosphere of messianic hopes. In my opinion, Sri Aurobindo guiding principle, this Bergman says, is actually almost identical with Jewish messianic hope. I mean, in the beginning, for me, it looks like really weird. I mean, what is the connection between Aurobindo to Jewish messianic hope? But then Bergman tried to explain it. He go into more detail in a big article he published about Aurobindo in Molad, which was in 1958, I think. So Bergman explained that the man of today is considered transitionary, being a tool which God has destined to prepare the way towards a new reborn humanity. This new humanity will rise in the course of spiritual transformation that will bring the kingdom of heaven down upon earth. And then Bergman quoted some psalms, some verses from the Bible to emphasize the messianic interpretation. But he add more up-to-date and pessimistic comment as part of the creation of the nation states, both in India and Israel. And I quote, but in the course of the last, in the last generation, our messianic hope and message had become colorless and treated. Often it has even been misinterpreted to support narrow political aims. Sri Aurobindo has revived the messianic idea and hopes in the full cosmic meaning and implication. We skip. Yesterday I spoke about this announcement before the independence, which actually resulted in Bergman publishing an article in Hebrew about the aim of independent states, because it's more or less at the same time. So I would jump. This is important. Bergman might have difficulty with what he considered the lack of method, but when he lectured on religion and philosophy in 1953 in the International Philosophical Conference in Brussels, a topic which he was interested through all his life, he related to Oriental philosophy in contrast to Western philosophy. For his argument, he used his lecture, Aurobindo extensively. He started with the famous quote of the God revealed in jail as a kind of vision to God and kind of examples that it's up today and it's going to happen today. But I will jump to how we end this lecture. And then he said like this. In the philosophical school, and then he compared like all the question of philosophy, the separation between philosophy and religion, and he tried to combine it, which you can say that also Aurobindo was trying to do. In the philosophical school of the East, which always have been fascinated through religion, it was always known that man can reach a broadening and enhancing his conscience when he transforms himself through a difficult inner discipline. They have always known that man must make himself a thinking and a living laboratory in when and with whose consciousness cooperation nature will progress to higher planes. And then he said in the end, in this direction, the future unification of now separated domains of philosophy and religion will have to be sought. So it's actually really used what Aurobindo said in this lecture. And there are many others. He used Aurobindo, for example, to argue with Buber in one of his books. There are many other examples. As I said, it's still a working paper. Well, how should I continue? I will quote another letter, and then I will go to the end, so it will take me another 3 minutes. Bergman writes to Sen, and he said that he writes it frankly. Maybe the reason for my silence, he didn't answer for a long time, was your kind encouragement in your letter that I should write directly to the mother to seek contact with her. My first impulse was, when your letter arrived, was to do it at once. But then came doubts. I wish to speak to you very frankly about it. I was afraid to lose my freedom of thought and decision. There are so many ways of spiritual, and that's I read to you, Shivananda, Krishnamurti, and so on. And then he gave a very, I will show you it after that to Boaz, also some of the interest, but then he writes something like this. There is the attitude of aspiration of an opening oneself to the divine. This seems to be simple, but when I read the words of the mother, and this is quoted from Mother India, October 57, when the Supreme Lord decided that there should be a world, he first brought forth the knowledge of the world and the power to make, and that is I, and when he commanded me to make the world. This is the mother right. Commanded me to make the world. And then the Bergman writes, said, I was deeply shocked. I can try to open myself to God, but not to a man. This was actually too much for Indo Sen, and after this letter, Sen gave us apparently his efforts, and he wrote, it was nice you frankly stated your feeling. My suggestion to write directly to the mother, if you felt inclined to do so, I've seen that the contact had developed between you and the mother, and that even a direct correspondence was possible. And then, this was actually the last letter. Yesterday you heard the Ben-Gurion letter, so I won't quote it. But it's not the end of the story. There is quite amusing evidence by the Bengali scholar, Professor Prithwindra Mukherjee, who was educated at Sri Aurobindo Ashram in Pondicherry and was a researcher in the French National Center for Scientific Research in Paris. Mukherjee came to Israel in 1972, few years before, very close before Bergman died, for lecturing in the famous Aurobindo epic Sagitri. Apart from the lecture he gave in the Hebrew University, he was invited to give an interview for Kol Israel official, Israel radio station Bamhum, by Madame de Menlis, She revealed to him her identity as the daughter-in-law of the personal friend of the mother had in Paris, belonging to the Max Theon group. Bergman invited him, because of this connection, because she knew Bergman, so Bergman invited him for a breakfast. And this Mukherjee wrote about this breakfast, and I quote, and this I will end here. On entering the impressive library where sat the venerable scholar, I discovered rows of books by Aurobindo. Amused by my reaction, he asked me to take the seat in front of him and commented on showing me the set. This was our food for thought. David and I read Aurobindo to find some light in our difficult days. David, of course, was David Ben-Gurion. Thank you very much.